Today, I'd like to start by covering our overall objective and also setting the stage to talk about the different companies that will be involved in the various business processes that we're going to see a demonstration from Justin and Justin later in the presentation. The service provider that we'll talk about today is a fictitious service provider called Parka Energy Services. Parka provides oil field services to our fictitious oil company, our operator customer, called Sirius Oil. The business processes that we're going to take a look at involve field ticket creation from Parka, along with invoice creation based off of that field ticket, and then finally submission of that invoice to our operator customer, Sirius Oil. We want to talk about this overall objective, these processes, within the context of an end-to-end electronic process. So we want to talk about moving away from a paper-based, manual, Excel-based process into an electronic world where everything takes place in the digital world, from field ticket creation to invoice submission. But before we get into that, I think it is healthy for us to ask ourselves the question, why? Many times technologists can be guilty of simply putting in technology for technology's sake, and I think that that's a bad practice, and we certainly want to make sure that there is some significant ROI that will motivate us to provide benefits by doing this in an electronic fashion. And if we look at that, we find that on both the operator side and the oil and gas service provider side, putting in an end-to-end electronic process benefits both sides of the transaction. This is a fantastic fact because we have both companies, both parties benefiting from this. It's really a win-win situation for both companies involved. So let's look in a little more detail what those benefits might be. From an oil and gas service provider perspective, we certainly see increased cash flow. How does that happen? It happens because we're able to invoice in a more timely fashion. We're able to invoice in a more accurate fashion, so our invoices go out contract compliant, ready to be paid, exactly accurate against the contract, and we can therefore get paid faster and increase our cash flow. That's a huge, huge financial benefit. Also, we're responding to our customers' requests and needs. So our operator customers are telling us that they want us to do business in an electronic fashion. They want us to put in place these end-to-end processes that are more automated. And so we want to be aligned very tightly with what our operator customer wants and needs. And by going to an electronic process, we therefore satisfy those requests from our very customer. We also reduce the error rates that we find in a manual process. So paper-based, Excel-based, we find that we can have a higher than normal error rate. We go electronic, we significantly reduce those. And the last thing from a service provider's benefits perspective is billing for items that we might not necessarily always remember to bill for in the field. So we have field engineers out there that are doing complex, dangerous, difficult jobs, and at the end of the day, at the end of the job, when they're creating that field ticket, they may or may not remember or be as familiar with the contract as the salesperson was, and so they may inadvertently leave a few things off here and there. Well, that can add up over time, and we've seen our customers report after doing audits by third-party firms, we find that they are seeing that they lose sometimes in the case 2 to 3 to even 4% revenue due to unbilled items. So electronic, we can recapture all that. Huge benefits to the service providers, obviously. What about the operators? Operators, we find that on the low end, we find that the cost to process paper manual invoices can be $8 to $12. That's on the low end. Imagine an operator that's processing thousands, if not tens of thousands of invoices per month. That over time adds up to a tremendous amount of money. So if we can eliminate that cost, significantly reduce it, then we're bringing a lot of financial benefit to that operator. What about the time to process those invoices? 3 weeks on average to process manual paper invoices, plus a couple of weeks to correct errors that are found on those invoices. So they come in, they're not contract compliant. We've got to spend the time researching the contract and making sure that we get it correct on the field ticket and on the invoice. Then we've got to go back to the service provider and get them to fix it and resubmit. So All of that takes a lot of time. If we can reduce that time, then now we've got our personnel, our expensive personnel, our highly trained personnel can now refocus on higher value tasks. They can do other things to benefit our operator customer. Finally, a lot of operators will end up putting in place point-to-point solutions in some cases. And I've seen that in the past many years ago. Those projects can be very, very costly, on the order of $80,000 to $400,000 to put those point-to-point solutions in place. For a few suppliers, that might be nice. As we scale up, that can be a very, very costly experience, costly projects. And they take a long time. I've seen lots of those projects take upwards of a year to do. So there's lots and lots of motivators and benefits that we find by doing an end-to-end electronic process, and we see them benefiting not only the service provider, but obviously also the operator customer as well. Now let's talk about the scenario itself. In our case here, we have Park Energy Services is a wireline company. They're sending out a wireline truck to a well that's operated by Sirius Oil. They're running downhole tools. They're doing all sorts of wireline work down the hole. And ultimately, once that field engineer has finished that job at the well site, that person needs to generate a field service ticket. Some people might call it a field ticket, a shift summary report, a shift report, a daily report. I'm just going to call it a field service ticket here. The field service ticket has a variety of bits of information on it. Of course, we have the equipment and services that were used and performed in delivery of the service of the job. It's all priced out with discounting and units of measure and all those different things that are used to describe the line items, along with the supply line items that were consumed in delivery of the service, and finally the labor items that were used in performance of the job. So all of those things need to be accurately captured on this field service ticket, and then we need to capture the signatures. We need to get the signature from Sirius Oil's company man, the representative at the well site, along with our Park Energy Services field engineer. And finally, many times we find that the operator's company man wants to stamp it. And so he has a physical stamp that he might want to put on there to code information related to the well site or the segment that they're working, the project, the org number, all sorts of different things they might want to put on the stamp. All of this information on the field service ticket, the field engineer then needs to get routed to the operations department and the accounting department at Park Energy Services. Once that's there, they marry it up with an invoice, and that information then gets shipped out to the accounts payable department at Sirius Oil. That's the overall process that we're talking about. I want to now shift into an electronic description of how that works and talk about setting the stage for what needs to be in place in order to facilitate that electronic process. So I'm going to talk about two electronic processes here. One is e-ticketing. The next one is going to be e-invoicing. So on the e-ticketing side, we need to have certain bits of reference data, lookup data, some people might call it master data. That all needs to be in place so that we can build and create transactions on top of that. We need this accurate, consistent, standardized set of master data so that we can produce a very accurate, timely set of field tickets, quotes, invoices, and financial documents. So I'm going to look at the price book. I won't go into each one of these, but I want to just show you the price book component of it. In the price book component, we take items out of the catalog and we put them into standardized price books. And those standardized price books can cut across multiple customers, they can cut across different segments, and they can even cut across different locations and a variety of other dimensions as well. So let's take a look at these two price books, the Sirius Oil Wireline price book for both the Eagle Ford, and we've got another one for the Bakken. I'm going to pull the Bakken one out and take a look at just a few of the items. So I've only got 3 items highlighted. Of course, a normal price book would have thousands of items. In our case of this PowerPoint, we're just going to show a couple of them. But notice each one of them is priced a little bit differently. It's charged a little bit differently. What we can do then from that standardized price book that's customer specific for a specific location, we can then build other financial documents off of that price book. And the financial documents that we are most interested in are the quote, and then tickets, multiple tickets off the quote, and then finally an invoice. You might have one invoice per ticket. You might do roll-up invoicing, many across tickets on a single job, do end-of-job type invoicing. But the really nice thing about this that really gets us into contract compliance benefits is notice that logging while drilling unit charge at $900 a day. It's consistent across all 4 of those financial documents. And that allows us to achieve something that we call the 4-way match. Many companies are trying to achieve a 3-way match across just the contract, ticket, and invoice. But in this case, we bring in the quote. We can even go down to the quote level and get a 4-way match. Tremendous number of benefits related to that 4-way match. Gets us a really nice contract compliant invoice. Once we've got that invoice created, then what do we need to do with it? Well, from there, it's just still sitting in our oilfield service provider's ERP system. So we really want to get that ultimately into our operator's ERP system. So from the oilfield service provider ERP, we can export it out into whatever format it might be easiest to get out of that respective ERP. Maybe it's CSV, maybe it's XML, could be a SOAP web service, a REST API, whatever the case may be. But it's going to get dropped into the Actian Business Exchange, and from there, Actian will inspect that document, figure out where it needs to go and what format it needs to go into. And so it will run it through a translation or a transformation process. And take, for instance, PIDEX. It may convert that document into PIDEX XML or maybe even EDI for submission into a third-party data portal, maybe something like Open Invoice. From there, it then gets routed into the operator customer's ERP system. So if you notice, we have an end-to-end process that really never results in any manual type of work. We're collecting the data electronically at the point of delivery, at the well site or at the refinery location, and we're moving it through this process electronically, transforming it into the operator's format of choice, and then dropping it into their ERP system for them to process payment against. So we end up with a very accurate process, a very timely process, and most importantly, a very contract compliant process.